really excited to have Kathryn Klaber here for a really good discussion about price of energy and inflation. Kathryn, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe for our audience who might not be as familiar with you, maybe tell them a little bit about yourself and kind of how you became an industry expert in kind of the energy field.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me here at Schneider Downs. I got my start in the environmental field, spent about 10 years with an international EH&S firm, did my MBA right here in town at Carnegie Mellon University, spent some years in public policy, and then started the Marcellus Shale Coalition right when the shale revolution was taking off. And it was some wonderful, fast years where we really earned the license to operate and put Appalachia on the map in terms of its contributions to national and international production. And I run my own firm now, consulting firm, work a lot with the energy industry.
So I think the Marcellus Shale and kind of that revolution is an interesting, I think, place to kind of start this conversation, which is to say that I think everybody's looked at their energy bills, and whether you're putting gas in your tank or you're paying your heating bills or your electric bills, they're a lot more expensive than they were last year. And I think maybe if we could just talk about energy markets in general at a macro level, kind of what really moves that price of energy, and maybe talk about some of the factors behind it.
Sure. I mean, the simple answer is it's all supply and demand. But obviously the reality is there's a lot of moving parts to that. On the supply side, we have a plethora of natural gas beneath this region here and available in this country. But the question is how much is getting out and getting to market. And a long period over the last decade of getting the shale industry up and active in this country. And a lot of capital was put in, and investors probably around the 2018 period started to pull back and say, let's favor some free cash flow. A lot of companies went to a maintenance capital mode, meaning they were only going to put as much money in to keep production at a flat level. And so obviously that had impacts on supply. You add to that the difficulty, especially in the northeastern U.S., of getting infrastructure permitted. And there have been more barriers, I think, than anybody would have imagined at the local, state, and federal level to getting that interstate infrastructure in place. So we've had constraints there. New England's suffered from it. And we have a lot of production here in Appalachia that can't get out to market.
And I think that's the interesting thing for me as I kind of assess this from an investment perspective is that you see the price going up, and I think that there's this supply and demand. And I think I think maybe more more than casual observer kind of understand there's a supply and demand kind of push-pull to it. But I think that there's also this idea that when you go into this maintenance mode, well, Katie, hey, prices are going up. We need more supply. Let's just flip this on like a light switch. Can you maybe kind of talk about when you go into that mode where you're just trying to really perfectly match supply and demand, how a demand increase is a lot harder to deal with?
Right.
When you're in that position where you're just reinvesting just enough to meet current demand.
Well, and remember, there are hundreds and hundreds of companies in this country doing what's best for their shareholders, whether they're private or publicly traded, multinational, or headquartered in just one or in one basin. So, yeah, it's a matching that individual companies are doing for their own goals, and then are happening in the overall marketplace, connected by pipelines, in different ways. But yeah, so I think the demand side of the equation is what's probably prompted some of the biggest swings right now. So you have a situation where, let's say Texas in February of 2021 has a shutdown, and there's still that demand, and yet the supply is interrupted, and that had a huge price shock. There's also LNG. This is now a global commodity, not just something that's used in the immediate place where it's developed. But there is more demand internationally than we are getting able to get product, to market. And so there are, LNG tankers that are going, supposed to be going to India or China that are getting rerouted to Russia. And obviously the Ukraine war has had, a delta on top of what was already a constraint.
And I think that's sort of kind of, when you have these price shocks that we have, like you talk about kind of the grid in Texas kind of freezing over in February, and then you also have just the demand increase that we're currently experiencing now. I think that there's a narrative out there that it's price gouging, and really I think it's more of an effect of supply and demand. And then really when you think back to 2015 and 2016, when there were some poor capital allocation decisions, I think, made by some of these large and small producers, and capital got constrained as well. So when capital doesn't flow into an industry, it's a lot harder to put supply back on when you're capital constrained and you're trying to just do maintenance.
Right. Yeah, and I think there is an uncertainty about the future, and business doesn't like uncertainty. But when you see, pipelines canceled or delayed, or you see choices being made in certain markets, you're not getting that kind of long-term certainty as to where that's going, or optimization. The other demand and supply dynamic that's really, I think, opaque right now to the general public is how much we've had a shift in our electricity generation too. So, remember a number of years ago when natural gas overtook coal in its percent of electricity delivery. And so, this talk toward electrification, is fine if that's what the market wants, but about nearly 40% of our natural gas of our electricity generation is now by natural gas. So that's also having, kind of a constraining effect and driving prices.
And I think now would be a kind of an appropriate time to transition to something that Elon Musk, recently commented on. So, for those that don't know who Elon Musk is, he is the CEO, founder, of Tesla. I think truly a forward-thinking company that is really trying to change, the way that we certainly get from point A to point B. And he commented that the need for this all of the above strategy to really get us kind of, through this short to intermediate term time period where we're having kind of these supply and demand imbalances, and where I think that comment, it comes from, I think he, more than anybody else, is really informed about how, say, liquid natural gas is really pulled out from the ground, and I think the efforts of the industry to make sure that it's a safe way to provide the best possible use for it. Can you talk about how the industry is, I think, regulated, and how that regulation extends to and really kind of ensures a safety that maybe the general public is not necessarily aware of? Yeah. Certainly our clients might have a lack of knowledge there.
Well, you've packed a lot into that, and we could. I think every point you made is worth addressing. All of the above that Elon Musk referred to, is I think a really good way that we need to start thinking about these energy issues. We can't be whipsawing back and forth. I've heard a term that I think really captures a lot. Instead of an energy transition, it should be an energy addition. We should take advantage of all the things that we have to us, especially in this southwestern Pennsylvania region and beyond. But the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance, it's been really fascinating to see how quickly energy companies have developed their own plans, commitments, transparency to their investors, whether that be publicly traded companies, or even, and I wouldn't have expected to see as many private companies, going that route. And I think what's really encouraging about that, those disclosures, is a lot of it are the issues that the industry's been working on since they opened up shop here. I had the privilege of seeing a lot of the work that was being done both within companies for safety that has, top priority, but also environmental protection, understanding the license to operate was fragile, and we wanted to not be, making it harder to do business going forward. And so when you read these ESG reports, you see quite a bit of documenting what was already happening but just wasn't available to the public. On the regulatory front, that's that's a whole conversation. But I've been privy to a lot of how those regulations got modernized. So here in Pennsylvania, they were written to have a vertical well to go straight down and nothing else. And now we've got a technology, that has been developed to go horizontally, which really just meant you needed to rewrite rules. But in the meantime, we got them modernized to a point where it was truly the best practices brought from a lot of different companies who had been operating in a lot of different jurisdictions. So I know, I wouldn't have ever had a concern, health and safety wise, being on a well pad or, living next to a well pad. And, I think that the track record has really proven itself here.
Yeah, and I think that there's, at least in conversations that I have with folks, there are certain major events. For my parents, right, it was Exxon Valdez. For me, it was Deepwater Horizon. You tend to I think there's some folks that latch on to one event and realize and don't necessarily understand the size and the scope and the scale, the scale, right, of just how big and how complex these projects are, and I think that along with and I guess without delving into the politics of it, when you have things are kind of ping ponging back and forth, it probably makes it a little bit harder, right?
Yeah. Well, and those are we both emphasize the word scale there because offshore development is very different than onshore. And I think the onshore, just a quick anecdote, was working with a British company, and I hosted a tour over here. And as they were getting back on the plane at Pittsburgh International Airport, I said, "What's your single biggest takeaway from touring from north central down to southwestern Pennsylvania's onshore shale development?" And they said that you don't even notice it unless you knew exactly where you were going, especially the wells that are operating for years and years. Once that site's been reclaimed, you could drive right by it and not even know it was there. So the impact of thousands of wells and all of the supply chain around that really is not of the scale of a Exxon Valdez. It's still very important because of the proximity to homes. But I think when you look at how much gas has been produced now out of our region, we've got a pretty darn good track record, and I think that the environmental benefits, the environmental kind of protection versus where else we could be getting our natural gas from around the world, the geopolitical power that it brings to our country to make our own decisions going forward, and the economic benefits can't be knocked. When you got royalty owners, I'm sure among your clients.
Yeah, and I think that there's you think about the impact that they have on kind of local economies, providing really good jobs. And I also think about it from an ESG front and from just an investment front too. The consistency of natural gas as a baseloading fuel, as a baseloading power source, whatever the best use is. And we could, I think the story for another day is what is the actual best use?
It's a very versatile fuel.
It's a very versatile fuel, and what that baseload capability, at least in the research that we've done, allows more renewable resources, more renewable sources of energy to become a bigger part of the grid. We can't make the sun shine, we can't make the wind blow, but when they're not happening, we have LNG, or these kind of more, more traditional fuel sources to kind of power that. I think that gets lost in the story, and it kind of goes back to what Elon Musk was saying about kind of all of the above.
Right.
That all-in solution is going to help make the world a safer, cleaner place.
And we do have to get beyond an us and a them, or a transition that in reality can't even happen, let alone thinking it's the right direction to go. And I hope that we'll be seeing those kind of conversations, that these high prices, unfortunately, may be the impetus to some energy addition instead of transition discussions.
Yeah, I think energy addition is kind of a good way to think of it, right? And I think it's when you get past the us and the them, and you just look at how can we best and most sustainably create really good solid ways to heat your home and keep the lights on. I think that's the conversation moving forward. If you kind of wrapping this up, kind of putting a bow on this conversation, if you had to put an outlook, right, for where we're going to be in kind of the next 5 or 10 years in terms of energy production, kind of maybe give us a little glimpse of what you're seeing in the conversations that you're having with your clients, to kind of give us that to look forward to.
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of two boundaries or conditions, and we're going to end up somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, one could be that we continue on a forced transition, where the kind of incentives that we saw in the Inflation Reduction Act, where we are kind of top down making decisions about the right way to go. I think we can find ourselves paying a lot more money for energy, and I think the worst the worst impacts of that are going to be to the least the most vulnerable, where those energy bills that you started the conversation with that represent a huge percentage of those household spends could get even worse. So let's hope that boundary condition we're not out there. Yeah. And the other side could be, ideally that some of these high prices and the energy IQ of us all, we learn more about the interplay, not just, here at home, but globally, and recognize how blessed we are as a nation to have innovation in energy, to have new technologies that the market can support and perpetuate. In giving consumers choices has worked for a long time for us, for this country, and we should be looking at those same opportunities for energy, going forward with under a reasonable, rational, straightforward regulatory regime.
And I think as we get through, our client conversations that we have, inflation is always the first thing that we talk about, and I think that there's. I don't think that we solve all of it in this conversation, but I think that the overarching kind of the supply demand, the interplay between all of these different kind of inputs is something that the conversation will hopefully continue to be going, and hopefully we'll have you back to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the things that you're seeing 6-12 months down the road, because I do think that this idea of energy and the prices, the high prices are not, they're likely to still be here with us. It's not something that course corrects. You can't flip a light switch on and make the supply come up to meet the demand. But I certainly hope for a substantial conversation like we have continues to play out across kind of local, state and federal agencies as we hopefully gain that, like you said, we're blessed with all these resources, all of the above, this innovation.
A lot of the story yet to be told.
A lot of the story yet to be told. So, on behalf of Schneider Wealth Management, Kate, thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Very much.
Thank you.